The oncologist's words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. But it wasn't the cancer diagnosis that knocked the wind out of me. It was watching my wife Sandra's face light up with what she thought was relief when she heard 6 months to live. I sat there in Dr. Martinez's sterile office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps, and watched the woman I'd loved for 23 years struggle to hide what looked suspiciously like excitement. Her hand squeezed mine, but it felt perfunctory, like she was checking off a box on some invisible list. Comfort dying husband. Check. Well, want to start an aggressive treatment plan immediately, Dr. Martinez was saying, his pen scratching against his prescription pad. Chemotherapy, radiation, perhaps surgery, depending on how the tumors respond. How much will all this cost? Sandra asked, cutting through his medical jargon with the precision of a corporate accountant, which she was. Her voice carried that same tone she used when reviewing quarterly budgets, clinical, detached, calculating. Dr. Martinez paused, clearly taken aback by the directness of the question. Well, with insurance, you're looking at significant out-of-pocket expenses, perhaps $50,000 to $70,000, maybe more depending on and his survival chances with treatment? Sandra, I started, but she held up a manicured finger. I need to know the numbers, David. We have to be practical. Practical. The word tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. Here I was, 47 years old, being told my pancreas was essentially a ticking time bomb, and my wife was running a cost-benefit analysis like I was a failing business unit she was considering shuttering. With aggressive treatment, we might extend that timeline to 18 months, possibly 2 years, Dr. Martinez said carefully. Without treatment? 6 months, I finished for him. The drive home to our suburban Chicago split level was silent except for the rhythmic thump of our Honda Pilot's tires over the expansion joints on I-294. Sandra stared out the passenger window at the autumn landscape, corporate parks and strip malls punctuated by the occasional burst of maple trees gone gold and red. October in Illinois had always been my favorite time of year, but now I wondered if I'd see another one. We need to call the kids, Sandra said as we pulled into our driveway, past the Henley family sign that had seemed so optimistic when we'd had it made 5 years ago. Yeah, I agreed, though something in her tone made my stomach clench. I'll call Jake, you call Emma. Our 21-year-old son was finishing his senior year at Northwestern, majoring in business like his mother. Emma, 19, was at USC studying film. My influence, Sandra always said with barely concealed disapproval. Both kids had been expensive investments, and looking at our manicured lawn and the BMW in the garage next to my pickup truck, I realized we'd been living pretty close to our means for a family pulling down nearly $200,000 a year. That evening, we sat around our kitchen table, the same oak table where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where I'd helped with homework and Sandra had balanced checkbooks. The kids had driven home immediately, Jake's face pale and serious, Emma's eyes red from crying during the entire drive from California. "So what's the plan, Dad?" Jake asked, his voice cracking slightly despite his attempt to sound mature and in control. He looked so much like me at that age. Same dark hair, same stubborn jawline, same way of clenching his fists when he was trying not to show emotion. "Well, there are treatment options," I began, but Sandra cut me off. "Expensive options," she said, spreading some papers across the table. "I've been running the numbers. Between the medical bills and the fact that your father won't be able to work—" "Mom," Emma whispered, her film student's eye clearly reading the subtext in Sandra's tone. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying we need to be realistic about quality of life versus financial impact on the family's future." Sandra's voice had that boardroom crispness that had served her so well climbing the corporate ladder at Gallagher Industries. "Your father's life insurance policy pays out $250,000. The treatment costs alone could eat up most of our savings in retirement, and there's no guarantee of success." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest that had nothing to do with the cancer. This was my family, the people I'd worked 60-hour weeks to provide for, whose college tuitions I'd paid without question, whose dreams I'd supported even when they seemed impractical or expensive. "You're talking about Dad like he's already dead," Jake said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. He looked between his mother and me, and I could see him running his own calculations. His girlfriend Melissa was expensive: designer clothes, fancy restaurants, spring break trips to Cabo. His lifestyle depended on family money that would dry up if we spent everything on keeping me alive. "I'm talking about what's best for everyone," Sandra replied smoothly. "Your father is a practical man. He's always put this family's financial security first." And that's when it hit me, really hit me, what was happening here. My wife of 23 years, the mother of my children, was making an economic argument for letting me die. Not explicitly, of course. Sandra was too smart for that. But the subtext was clear as a neon sign. Your death is worth more to us than your life. I excused myself and walked out to my workshop in the garage, past the lawnmower I'd bought last spring and the snowblower I wouldn't need this winter. The space smelled like sawdust and WD-40, familiar and comforting. I'd built most of the furniture in our house in this workshop: the bookshelf in Emma's room, the coffee table in the living room, Jake's desk. My hands, now slightly trembling from the news and the shock, traced the smooth surface of my workbench. 23 years of marriage, 2 kids raised from infancy to adulthood, a quarter-century of shared dreams, inside jokes, lazy Sunday mornings, and holiday traditions. And it all came down to a spreadsheet analysis that showed I was worth more dead than alive. But here's the thing about getting a death sentence: it clarifies your thinking in ways that decades of comfortable living never can. Sitting there among my tools and half-finished projects, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. If my family wanted to treat my life like a business decision, then I was going to show them what a real cost-benefit analysis looked like. I pulled out my phone and dialed Tommy Kowalski, my best friend since high school and the smartest financial planner I knew. "David, Jesus, it's late. What's going on?" "Tommy, I need to see you tomorrow, and I need you to bring everything you know about life insurance policies, trusts, and estate planning." "Buddy, you're scaring me. What's this about?" I looked through the garage window at my house, where warm light spilled from the kitchen windows. Inside, my family was probably still sitting around that oak table, discussing my death like a quarterly earnings report. "It's about making sure the right people get what they deserve," I said. The next morning, I told Sandra I had some errands to run. "Bank business," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I met Tommy at a Starbucks in downtown Wheaton, far enough from our neighborhood that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Tommy had always been the smart one in our friendship. While I'd gone into construction management, he'd gotten his MBA and built a successful practice helping middle-class families navigate the complexities of financial planning. He was also the godfather to both my kids and had been the best man at my wedding. If anyone would understand the position I was in, it would be Tommy. "Cancer?" he said, after I'd filled him in on the diagnosis and my family's reaction. "Christ, David, I'm so sorry." "The prognosis isn't great, but that's not why I'm here." I slid a folder across the small table between us. "I need you to look at my life insurance policy and tell me what my options are." Tommy opened the folder and scanned the documents, his expression growing more concerned as he read. "This is a pretty standard term life policy. $250,000 payout, premiums current. What exactly are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about who deserves to benefit from my death and who doesn't." "David, you can't change the beneficiaries to spite Sandra. I mean, you can, legally, but—" "I'm not talking about spite," I interrupted. "I'm talking about justice. My wife looked at my death sentence like it was a winning lottery ticket. My kids are calculating whether keeping me alive is worth the expense. These aren't the people I've been working to provide for all these years." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with the plastic stick. Who were you thinking of instead? That's when I told him about Maria. Maria Santos had cleaned our house every other Tuesday for the past 8 years. She was 42, a single mother raising 3 kids after her husband died in a construction accident. She worked 3 different cleaning jobs to make ends meet, driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic that broke down more often than it ran. Her oldest daughter, Carmen, was a senior in high school with grades good enough for Northwestern or U of I, but no money for tuition. Her son Miguel was 14 and crazy about baseball, but played with a glove held together with duct tape. The youngest, Sophia, was 10 and had never owned a new dress in her life. "I've watched Maria work," I told Tommy. "She doesn't just clean our house, she cares for it. She waters Sandra's plants when we're out of town, she's fixed our garbage disposal twice, and she's never stolen so much as a paperclip in 8 years. When Emma was going through her rebellious phase and Sandra was too busy with work to notice, Maria was the one who told me Emma was skipping school." David: "She works harder in a day than my wife works in a week, Tommy. And she does it all to provide for her kids, not to maintain some lifestyle she thinks she deserves. When Carmen was sick with pneumonia last year, Maria cleaned houses with the flu because she couldn't afford to take time off for the doctor's visit." Tommy nodded slowly. "I remember you mentioning her. You helped pay for her car repairs a couple times. Best money I ever spent. But here's what really gets me. Last month, when I was having that kitchen faucet problem, Maria stayed an extra hour to help me fix it. She wouldn't take extra money for the time, said I was family." I felt my throat tighten. When's the last time anyone in my actual family said that to me? "So you want to make Maria the beneficiary? I want to make Carmen, Miguel, and Sophia the beneficiaries. Equal shares. Maria as the trustee until they're adults." I pulled out another set of documents. "I've also been thinking about the house. Sandra's name is on the deed, but I've been paying the mortgage for 23 years.
There are ways to complicate that, right? Tommy studied the papers, his financial planner's mind clearly working through the possibilities. There are some options. You could take out a substantial loan against the house if you have a good reason for needing the cash. Like paying for cancer treatment? Exactly. If you borrow against the equity, and then, well, if the loan terms are structured correctly, Sandra might find herself in a difficult financial position. What about my retirement accounts? The 401k? The IRAs? Those you can change easily. Sandra's not the designated beneficiary on those. You just named her as your spouse. You can redirect those funds anywhere you want. We spent the next 2 hours going through every asset, every account, every financial instrument that had my name on it. By the time we were done, Tommy had outlined a plan that would leave Sandra with the house and a substantial mortgage payment she couldn't afford on her salary alone. My retirement accounts, totaling about $140,000, would go to a scholarship fund Tommy would help me establish for kids whose parents worked in domestic services. The life insurance would provide Carmen, Miguel, and Sophia with college educations and a start in life that Maria could never have given them on her own. "This is legal?" I asked. "Completely. Unethical by some standards, but completely legal." "Your wife has no legal claim to your retirement accounts or your life insurance beneficiaries, and taking a loan against your house to pay for medical treatment is not only legal, it's exactly what most people in your situation would do. Except I won't be using the money for medical treatment." "No," Tommy agreed. "You'll be using it to fund the scholarship account and maybe take a trip you've always wanted to take. See some places you've never seen. Enjoy your last few months." The irony wasn't lost on me. By choosing to die with dignity instead of bankrupting my family with expensive treatments that might not work, I was giving Sandra exactly what she wanted. I just wasn't giving it to her. That afternoon, I came home to find Sandra in her home office working on her laptop. The spreadsheet on her screen was labeled Life Insurance Planning, and I could see college costs, mortgage payments, and retirement projections. "How was your day?" she asked, without looking up from her calculations. "Productive," I said. I've decided not to pursue aggressive treatment. Her fingers paused over the keyboard for just a moment, a tiny tell that she was pleased, but trying not to show it. Are you sure? I mean, if there's a chance. There's always a chance, I replied, but you were right about the quality of life issues. I don't want to spend my last months in and out of hospitals, sick from chemo, draining our savings for a few extra weeks of suffering.
Sandra turned in her chair to face me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with in college, concerned, caring, wanting to comfort me. But it passed quickly, replaced by that calculating look I'd grown to recognize over the years. "That's very brave of you," she said, "and practical. I think it's the right decision." Practical. There was that word again. Over the next few weeks, I started putting Tom's plan into action. I took out a home equity loan for $80,000, telling Sandra it was for experimental treatment options that insurance wouldn't cover. She signed the papers without reading them, trusting me to handle the financial details the way I always had. Instead of experimental treatments, I used the money to fund the scholarship account and to take care of some people who had taken care of me over the years. I gave $10,000 to Jimmy Kowalski, Tommy's younger brother who'd been struggling since his divorce. I paid off the medical debt for Rosa Martinez, the woman who'd cleaned my office building for the past 5 years. I bought Maria a reliable used car, a 3-year-old Toyota Camry that would last her another decade. "Mr. David, I cannot accept this," Maria said when I handed her the keys. We were standing in my driveway, and she was crying so hard she could barely speak. "This is too much." "Maria, in 8 years, you've never asked me for anything. Not a raise, not a day off, not even a glass of water on the hottest days."
You've taken care of my family's home like it was your own. This isn't charity, it's payment for services rendered. But your wife, she will not like this. My wife doesn't need to know. This is between you and me. That evening, Sandra noticed Maria's new car in our driveway. "Did Maria win the lottery or something?" she asked, peering out the kitchen window. "I helped her out with a loan," I said. "Her old car finally died." "David, we can't afford to be lending money to the Help, not with everything else going on." The Help. Maria had a name, had worked for us for 8 years, had probably spent more time in our house than Sandra had over the past year, and she was still the Help? "It's taken care of," I said. The changes to my insurance and retirement accounts were easy to make. A few phone calls, some paperwork, and suddenly Carmen Santos was going to Northwestern on a full ride. Miguel was going to have the best baseball equipment money could buy, and Sophia was going to grow up knowing she could be anything she wanted to be. I also made one other change that Tommy had suggested. I updated my will to leave my workshop tools and equipment to Carlos Martinez, a young construction worker who'd been helping me with some home projects. Carlos reminded me of myself at 25, hardworking, honest, and trying to build something better for his family. The tools weren't worth much money, but they represented 40 years of craftsmanship and could help Carlos start his own contracting business. As my health began to decline in November, Sandra's attention to me became more obviously performative. She'd ask how I was feeling in front of the kids or our friends, but when we were alone, she was usually on her phone or laptop, working on projects or shopping online. She'd started subscribing to real estate websites, looking at condos in downtown Chicago, places more suitable for a single woman with disposable income. The kids were just as transparent. Jake visited twice a week, but spent most of his time talking about his job prospects after graduation and his plans to propose to Melissa. He mentioned several times how helpful the life insurance money would be for starting his career and putting a down payment on a house. Emma called regularly from California, but our conversations always seemed to circle back to her film projects and how much her equipment cost. None of them asked about my pain levels, my fears, or how I was spending my days. They asked about my appetite because weight loss might indicate the cancer was progressing faster, and they asked about my energy levels because that might affect my timeline, but they never asked how I felt about dying. The only person who seemed genuinely concerned about my emotional state was Maria. "Mr.
"David, you seem sad," she said one Tuesday in December while cleaning the bathroom. "Is the sickness making you sad?" I was sitting in my bedroom, ostensibly reading, but actually watching the bare trees in our backyard bend against the winter wind. "Sometimes," I admitted. "My husband, when he was sick before he died, he was scared. Not of dying, but of leaving us alone. Is that what scares you?" I looked at this woman who cleaned toilets and vacuumed carpets for a living and realized she understood something about death and family that my wife, with her MBA, had completely missed. "Yeah," I said, "that's exactly what scares me." Maria sat down in the chair next to my bed, still holding her cleaning supplies. "Mr. David, can I tell you something? My Roberto, before he died, he was worried we would not be okay without him. But you know what I told him?" "What?" "I told him that love doesn't die when the body dies. The love he gave us, the way he taught Carmen to be strong, the way he showed Miguel how to be a good man, the way he made Sophia laugh, that love stays. And when we are sad or scared, we remember that love, and it helps us." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You are a good man, Mr. David. You work hard, you are kind to people, you help when you can help. That love, that kindness, it will stay with your family. Maybe they don't say it now because they are scared, but they will remember."
I wanted to tell her that my family wasn't scared. They were calculating. But Maria had lost her husband in an accident that left her with nothing but 3 kids and a mountain of debt, and she'd managed to find meaning and purpose in that tragedy. Her faith in human nature was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Thank you, Maria," I said. "That means more to me than you know." In January, my condition worsened significantly. The pain was manageable with medication, but my energy was nearly gone. I spent most of my days in my recliner in the living room, reading or watching television, while Sandra worked in her home office and managed the household around my increasing limitations. Dr. Martinez estimated I had perhaps 6 weeks left, maybe less. Sandra received this news with the same composure she'd shown at the original diagnosis, but I caught her making phone calls to her sister about arrangements and timelines. That's when I decided it was time to let people know what I'd done. I started with Tommy, asking him to come over on a Saturday afternoon when Sandra was at her book club and the kids were doing their own things. "Everything's in place," he confirmed, reviewing the paperwork we'd completed over the past few months. "The scholarship fund is established and funded, the insurance beneficiaries are changed, the retirement accounts are transferred. When the time comes, Carmen, Miguel, and Sophia will have about $90,000 each for education and general support. And Sandra? She'll have the house with about $60,000 in equity after the loan is paid off, plus whatever she's saved on her own. If she's smart about it, she can refinance or sell and downsize. She won't be destitute, but she won't be living the lifestyle she's been planning for either." "Good," I said, and meant it. "David, are you sure about this? I mean, she's still your wife, the mother of your kids." "She's also the woman who saw my death as a financial opportunity," I replied, "and they're the kids who've been treating my funeral like a lottery drawing. They made their choice, Tommy. Now they get to live with it." The next conversation was with Carlos Martinez. I asked him to come by the following weekend to help me organize my workshop. "Mr. Henley, you don't look so good," Carlos said when he arrived Sunday morning. "Maybe you should be resting." "I'll have plenty of time to rest soon," I said. "Right now, I want to make sure these tools go to someone who'll use them properly." I spent the morning showing Carlos my table saw, my router, my collection of hand planes that had belonged to my father. I explained the quirks of each tool, the maintenance they required, the projects they were best suited for. "These are really nice tools, Mr. Henley. Professional quality. You're sure you want to give them away?" "I'm sure. But there's one condition. You have to promise me you'll use them to build something good, something that matters." Carlos nodded solemnly. "I promise, sir. I've been wanting to start my own business.
maybe do custom cabinets and furniture. These tools would make that possible. Then they're yours when the time comes. My lawyer has all the paperwork. The hardest conversation was with Maria. I waited until a Tuesday when Sandra was at work and asked Maria to sit with me in the living room when she finished cleaning. "Maria, I need to tell you something important," I began, "about my will and my insurance." I explained what I'd done, watching her face go from confusion to shock to something that might have been panic. "Mr. David, no, this is not right. Your family, they should have this money." "My family has made it clear that they see my death as a windfall," I said. "They've been planning how to spend the insurance money since the day I was diagnosed. They don't need it. They want it. There's a difference." "But I am not family. Carmen, Miguel, Sophia, we are not your responsibility." "Maria, you've taken better care of my home and shown more concern for my well-being than my own wife has. Carmen works harder in high school than my son works in college. Miguel has more character at 14 than most adults I know. And Sophia has a sweetness and joy that reminds me of what's good in the world." I reached over and took her calloused hands in mine. "You are family. You're the family I chose, not the family I was stuck with." Maria was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mr. David, this is too much. What if your wife finds out? What if she tries to change it?" "She can't change it. The paperwork is all legal and filed. But I need you to promise me something." "Anything." "I need you to promise that you'll use this money to give your kids opportunities, not luxuries. Carmen goes to college. Miguel plays baseball. Sophia gets to be a kid without worrying about money. But I don't want them to forget what work means or what it's like to struggle. That struggle is what made them strong." "I promise," Maria whispered. "I promise." By February, I was mostly bedridden. Sandra had hired a part-time nurse to help with my care during the day while she was at work. The nurse, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman in her 60s who'd been caring for terminal patients for decades. "Your family seems very devoted," she said one afternoon while helping me with my medication. "Do they?" I asked. "Well, your wife calls several times a day to check on you, and your children visit regularly." "They do visit regularly," I agreed. "But do you know what they talk about when they're here?" Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. "It's not my place to listen to private conversations." "They talk about funeral arrangements, probate timelines, and financial planning. My wife has already started clearing out my home office. My son brought his girlfriend over last week to measure my workshop for a home gym conversion. My daughter keeps asking if I've written down all my passwords and account numbers." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "People handle grief differently, Mr. Henley. Sometimes what looks like callousness is really just a way of coping with overwhelming emotion." "Maybe," I said. "Or sometimes people just show you who they really are when they think it doesn't matter anymore." That evening, Sandra came into my bedroom with a stack of papers. "David, I need you to sign these," she said, settling into the chair next to my bed. "Legal stuff for the estate. Tommy's been helping me get everything organized." I looked through the documents. Most were standard probate forms, but several were related to my retirement accounts and life insurance policies. "What are these for?" I asked, pointing to a beneficiary change form. "Oh, just updating some paperwork, making sure everything's current." The form would have changed my retirement account beneficiaries back to Sandra. If I'd signed it, the scholarship fund would have received nothing. "I don't think I need to sign this one," I said, setting it aside. Sandra's friendly expression flickered for just a moment. "David, it's important that all the accounts are properly designated for tax purposes." "I'm sure they are," I replied, "but I've already taken care of all the beneficiary designations. Everything's exactly the way I want it." "But Tommy said—" "Tommy said what I asked him to say," I interrupted gently. "The accounts are fine, Sandra. Everything's going exactly where it's supposed to go." Later that night, I heard Sandra on the phone in her office, her voice carrying through the house in the way voices do when someone is trying to be quiet but is actually quite angry. "He won't sign them, Tommy. I don't understand why he's being so stubborn about this. What do you mean you can't discuss it? You're supposed to be helping us. Well, can't you just explain to him why it's important?" I smiled in the darkness of my bedroom. Tommy was a good friend and a better man than I'd given him credit for. He was going to let my family figure out my decision on their own timeline, not a moment before. The last few weeks passed in a haze of medication and visits from people saying goodbye. My brother came from Denver with his family. Some old friends from the construction company stopped by. Sandra's parents drove up from Springfield. Through it all, the one person who seemed genuinely sad about my dying was Maria. She came on Tuesdays as always, but now she spent most of her time just sitting with me, sometimes talking, sometimes just quietly sharing the space. "Mr. David," she said during one of her last visits, "I want you to know something. Every day for 8 years, I have prayed for your family. I will keep praying for them after you are gone." "Even though they don't deserve it?" "Especially because they don't deserve it," she said. "That is when prayer is most important." I died on a Thursday morning in early March, with Sandra holding my hand and telling me it was okay to let go. Mrs. Patterson said it was peaceful, and I suppose it was. The last thing I remember was looking out my bedroom window at the maple tree in our backyard, its bare branches just starting to show the first tiny buds of spring. The funeral was well attended and appropriately sad. Sandra wore black and accepted condolences with dignified grace. Jake and Emma spoke about their father's dedication to family and his strong work ethic. Several people from my job shared stories about my reliability and fairness as a supervisor. No one mentioned that I'd been a good man who'd chosen to be generous to people who'd been good to me, rather than to people who'd merely been related to me. But that was okay. The funeral wasn't really for me anyway. The reading of the will took place a week later in Tommy's office. Sandra, Jake, and Emma sat on one side of the conference table, while Tommy sat across from them with several manila folders. "This is pretty straightforward," Tommy began. "David's will leaves the house and its contents to Sandra, with the exception of the workshop tools which go to Carlos Martinez." Sandra nodded. This was what she'd expected. "However," Tommy continued, "there are some other matters we need to discuss. David took out a home equity loan last fall for $80,000. The balance on that loan is now payable and will need to be addressed." "What did he need $80,000 for?" Jake asked. "According to the loan application, medical expenses not covered by insurance." Sandra frowned, but David decided not to pursue aggressive treatment. "What medical expenses?" Tommy shrugged. "I processed the loan paperwork, but David handled the disbursement of funds privately." "Well, where did the money go?" Emma demanded. "That's not really something I can answer," Tommy replied. "David was very private about his financial decisions in his final months, but there are other matters to discuss." He opened another folder. David's retirement accounts, which total approximately $140,000, have been transferred to a scholarship fund for children of domestic service workers. The fund will be administered by Catholic Charities of Chicago. The silence in the room was profound. Sandra's face had gone very pale. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" she asked. "David changed the beneficiaries on his retirement accounts. The money will fund college scholarships for kids whose parents work in cleaning services, housekeeping, that sort of thing." "But that's our money," Jake said, his voice rising. "That's our inheritance." "Actually, it was David's money," Tommy corrected gently, "and he was free to designate it however he chose." "This is insane," Emma said. "Dad wouldn't do this. He wouldn't take money away from his own children to give to strangers."
Tommy opened a third folder. There's also the matter of the life insurance policy. Sandra leaned forward, her business instincts taking over. The life insurance goes to me. I'm the primary beneficiary. Actually, David changed those beneficiaries as well. The policy payout will be divided equally among Carmen Santos, Miguel Santos, and Sofia Santos, with their mother, Maria Santos, serving as trustee until the children reach age 25. This time, the silence lasted almost a full minute. Sandra's face cycled through confusion, shock, anger, and finally a cold fury that I would have recognized from 20 years of marriage. "Who the hell are Carmen, Miguel, and Sofia Santos?" she asked. "They're Maria's children," Tommy replied. "Your housekeeper's children." "Our housekeeper." Jake's voice cracked like he was 13 again. "Dad left our inheritance to the cleaning lady's kids?" "David left his money to people he chose to benefit," Tommy said firmly, "people he felt deserved support." Sandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. David was clearly not in his right mind when he made these changes. We'll contest this. We'll prove he was mentally incompetent due to his illness." "Sandra, I wouldn't recommend that," Tommy said quietly. "David made these changes over a period of several months, beginning shortly after his diagnosis. He was examined by 2 different physicians during that time, and both certified that he was mentally competent. He also wrote several letters explaining his reasoning, which I have in my possession." "What letters?" Emma demanded. Tommy opened one final folder and pulled out several sealed envelopes. "David wrote these for each of you to be opened after the will was read. He wanted to explain his decisions personally." He handed each of them an envelope with their name written in my careful handwriting. Sandra tore hers open immediately, her eyes scanning the page rapidly. As she read, her face grew even paler. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew exactly what we were thinking." Jake opened his letter next, and I could see his hands shaking as he read. Emma was crying before she finished the first paragraph. I'd spent a lot of time on those letters, trying to find the right words to explain what I'd discovered about my family and about myself in my final months. I'd tried to be honest without being cruel, direct without being vindictive. To Sandra, I'd written about the way she'd looked at my death sentence like a financial opportunity, and how that had shown me that our marriage had become a business partnership, where I was simply the income-generating asset. I'd told her that she would be fine financially if she made smart decisions, but that she would need to learn to support herself rather than living off my life insurance policy. To Jake, I'd explained that watching him calculate the value of my death had shown me that I'd failed as a father by giving him everything he wanted without teaching him to work for anything. I told him that the money he'd been counting on would instead go to children who understood the value of hard work and sacrifice. To Emma, I'd written about disappointment, not in her dreams of being a filmmaker, but in the way she'd begun to see those dreams as something she was entitled to rather than something she needed to earn. I told her that real artists struggle, and that maybe some struggle would make her a better artist. But I'd also written about love. I told each of them that despite everything, I loved them and hoped they would learn from this experience. I told them that it wasn't too late to become the people I'd always hoped they could be. "This is vindictive," Sandra said, crumpling the letter in her fist. "This is David being spiteful because he was dying." "Actually," Tommy said, "David was quite specific about his motivations. He felt that he was teaching you the same lesson about consequences that he'd been trying to teach your children their entire lives. He said that if you wanted to treat his death like a financial transaction, he would show you what a real financial transaction looked like." "We'll contest this," Sandra repeated. "We'll hire the best lawyers money can buy." "With what money?" Tommy asked gently. "You have about $60,000 in home equity after the loan is paid off, plus whatever you've saved independently. David was very thorough in his planning." Sandra slumped back into her chair, the reality of the situation finally sinking in.
He planned this. He planned all of this. Yes, Tommy agreed. David spent his final months very carefully considering who deserved to benefit from his life's work. He concluded that the people who had shown him genuine care and respect were more deserving than the people who had shown him spreadsheets and timeline projections. Jake was staring at his letter, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "So, what are we supposed to do now? I graduate in 2 months. Melissa and I were planning to get married. We were counting on—" "You were counting on your father's death to fund your lifestyle," Tommy finished. "Maybe it's time to start counting on yourself instead." "This isn't fair," Emma said through her tears. "We're his children. We're his family." "Are you?" Tommy asked. "Because from what David told me, his family was the people who cared about his well-being more than his bank account. His family was the people who saw him as more than just an income source." The meeting ended with Sandra threatening legal action and the kids storming out of the office. Tommy called me that evening, not me, obviously, but he called Maria to let her know what had happened and to explain what the money would mean for her children. The fallout was immediate and dramatic. Sandra put the house on the market within a month, unable to afford the mortgage payments on her salary alone. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a complex that didn't allow pets, so she had to give away the golden retriever I'd bought for Emma's 16th birthday. Jake's relationship with Melissa ended abruptly when she realized the comfortable lifestyle she'd been expecting wasn't going to materialize. He had to get a job at a restaurant to pay for his final semester and moved back in with Sandra temporarily after graduation. The humiliation of being a college graduate living with his mother in a cramped apartment was probably more educational than anything he'd learned in business school. Emma dropped out of USC and came back to Chicago, ostensibly to help with the family crisis, but really because she couldn't afford the tuition without my life insurance money. She got a job at a coffee shop and started taking classes at the local community college, studying film production with students who were working multiple jobs to pay for their education. The media attention was minimal but embarrassing. Someone at Tommy's office leaked the story to a local reporter, and it made the rounds on social media as a cautionary tale about greed and family dynamics. Sandra was mortified when her colleagues at Gallagher Industries started treating her differently, no longer seeing her as the competent executive, but as the woman whose husband had publicly demonstrated that he found her unworthy of his legacy. But the real story was what happened to the Santos family. Carmen finished her senior year at the top of her class and received early admission to Northwestern with a full academic scholarship. The money I'd left her would cover living expenses and allow her to focus on her studies instead of working multiple jobs like her mother had always done. She planned to study engineering and had already been accepted into a summer internship program with a major Chicago firm. Miguel made the varsity baseball team as a sophomore, playing with new equipment that Carlos Martinez had helped him select. His grades improved dramatically when he no longer had to work after school to help his mother make ends meet. His coach said he had the skills to earn a college scholarship if he kept developing. Sophia started taking piano lessons and joined the school choir. For the first time in her life, she had new clothes for school pictures and didn't have to worry about whether there'd be enough money for lunch. Maria told Tommy that Sophia had started smiling again, something she hadn't realized the little girl had stopped doing until it came back. And Maria herself was able to quit 2 of her 3 cleaning jobs, keeping only the clients she genuinely enjoyed working for. She used some of the money to take English classes at night, working toward her GED and eventually hoping to get certified as a medical assistant. For the first time since her husband's death, she was able to dream about a future instead of just surviving day to day. The most satisfying update came from Carlos Martinez. Using my tools and the small business loan he was able to qualify for with his improved financial situation, Carlos started his own cabinet-making shop. Within 6 months, he had more work than he could handle and was thinking about hiring an apprentice.
He sent Tommy a picture of a dining room set he'd built for a young couple. Solid oak construction with hand-cut joinery that would last for generations. "Mr. Henley would be proud," Carlos had written on the back of the photo. "These tools are helping me build something good." As for my immediate family, the crisis forced them to confront some hard truths about themselves and their relationships with each other. Sandra eventually found a smaller position at a different company, taking a significant pay cut, but learning to live within her means for the first time in decades. She started dating a man named Robert, who was a teacher at the local high school, someone who valued her for more than her income potential.
Jake struggled for the first year after graduation, working various jobs and living paycheck to paycheck. But slowly, he began to develop a work ethic he'd never needed before. He eventually got hired by a small marketing firm where his Northwestern degree meant less than his willingness to work overtime and learn new skills. He started dating a woman named Sarah, who was a nurse and had worked her way through college on scholarships and student loans. Sarah wasn't impressed by his family background or his expensive education. She was impressed by his determination to build something for himself. Emma's journey was perhaps the most dramatic. Working at the coffee shop while taking community college classes, she met other students who were passionate about film but didn't have the financial resources for expensive equipment or prestigious programs. She started a small collective that made documentaries about working-class life in Chicago, filming stories about people like her mother's former housekeeper and her father's construction workers. Her work was raw and authentic in a way her earlier, more privileged efforts had never been. One of her documentaries about domestic workers won a regional festival award and caught the attention of a PBS producer. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. There were moments of resentment, arguments about my decisions, and attempts to rationalize their original behavior. Sandra complained to anyone who would listen that I had been unfair and vindictive. Jake went through a period where he blamed his problems on my selfishness rather than his own lack of preparation for adult responsibility. Emma struggled with guilt about her initial reaction to my diagnosis and anger about the way my death had upended her plans. But gradually, as they built new lives based on their own efforts rather than my financial support, something interesting happened. They began to understand what I'd been trying to teach them. Sandra realized that her marriage to me had become transactional somewhere along the way, and that she'd lost sight of the partnership and mutual support that had originally brought us together. She started therapy and began to understand how her corporate mindset had infected her personal relationships. Jake discovered that the satisfaction of earning something was completely different from the satisfaction of being given something. His first real promotion at the marketing firm meant more to him than anything his Northwestern degree had ever provided. Emma found that her struggles as a working student gave her insights into human nature and social dynamics that her privileged upbringing had shielded her from. Her films became more honest and powerful because they came from a place of genuine understanding rather than academic observation. 2 years after my death, Tommy organized a small memorial service at the cemetery. It wasn't an official event, just a gathering of people who wanted to remember me in a more personal way than the formal funeral had allowed. Sandra came, along with Jake and his girlfriend Sarah and Emma, but so did Maria and her children, Carlos Martinez, Rosa from my office building, and several of my former coworkers. Tommy had invited everyone who had been affected by my final decisions, both positively and negatively. The service was simple. People shared memories, talked about what my life had meant to them, and reflected on the lessons they'd learned from my death. Carmen Santos, now a sophomore at Northwestern studying mechanical engineering, spoke about the opportunities that my gift had provided and the responsibility she felt to honor that generosity by helping others when she was able. Carlos showed pictures of furniture he'd built with my tools and talked about the pride he felt in creating something beautiful and functional with his hands. He announced that he was starting a nonprofit program to teach woodworking skills to at-risk teenagers, giving them both practical abilities and the confidence that comes from creating something of value. Maria spoke last, in her careful English that had improved dramatically since she'd been able to afford proper classes. She talked about the difference between surviving and living, and how my gift had allowed her family to move from one to the other. But more importantly, she talked about the difference between giving and sacrificing, and how my final months had shown her that true generosity requires understanding who deserves support and who merely expects it. Mr. David taught me that family is not just the people you are born with, she said. Family is the people who choose to care for each other, who work for each other's happiness, who sacrifice for each other's dreams. Mr. David made us family not because he gave us money, but because he saw that we had already been caring for each other. Sandra cried during Maria's speech, and afterward she approached Maria and apologized for the way she'd treated her over the years. It was awkward and insufficient, but it was a beginning. Jake shook Carlos' hand and asked about the nonprofit program, expressing interest in helping with the business planning. Emma asked Carmen about her engineering studies and offered to document the woodworking program for Carlos' fundraising efforts. These weren't dramatic reconciliations or movie-ending transformations. They were small steps toward becoming better people, made possible by the crisis that had forced them to examine their assumptions about family, money, and responsibility. As people were leaving the cemetery, Tommy pulled Sandra aside for a private conversation. "David wanted me to give you this after the 2-year mark," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "He said you'd need time to understand his decisions before you could appreciate his final message." Sandra opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in my handwriting, along with a cashier's check for $25,000. The letter was short. "Sandra, if you're reading this, it means 2 years have passed since my death, and Tommy believes you've learned something from the experience of having to support yourself. This money comes from a small life insurance policy I kept separate from the main one, a policy I bought when Jake was born and never mentioned to you. This isn't your reward for good behavior, and it's not an apology for my decisions. It's my acknowledgement that despite everything, we shared 23 years and 2 children, and that has to count for something. I hope you've used these 2 years to remember who you were before you became so focused on what you thought you deserved. I hope you've learned the difference between being entitled to something and being worthy of it. The money is yours to use however you choose. I trust that the woman you've become will make better decisions than the woman you were when I died. Love always, David." Sandra read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. Then she looked up at Tommy. "How did he know?" she asked. "How did he know I would change?" "He didn't know," Tommy replied. "He hoped." David always said that people could choose to be better if they were given the right motivation. He just had to make sure you couldn't choose to stay the same. That evening, Sandra called Jake and Emma and asked them to meet her for dinner. Over pasta at a small Italian restaurant, she told them about the letter and the check. "What are you going to do with the money?" Emma asked. "I've been thinking about that," Sandra said, "and I think I want to add it to Dad's scholarship fund. Make it bigger, help more kids." Jake nodded slowly. "That sounds like something Dad would approve of." "I think he'd be proud of all of us," Emma said, eventually. They were probably right. If I could have seen them sitting in that restaurant talking about responsibility and generosity instead of entitlement and calculation, I would have been proud. Not because they'd learned to be grateful for my money, but because they'd learned to be worthy of my love. The truth is, I never wanted to punish my family. I wanted to save them. I wanted to save them from becoming the kind of people who could look at a dying man and see a financial opportunity. I wanted to save them from the emptiness of a life where relationships are transactions and love is contingent on economic benefit. I couldn't save myself from cancer, but I could use my death to teach the people I loved most about the difference between surviving and living, between taking and earning, between being entitled and being worthy. In the end, that might have been the most important thing I ever built. The Santos children are thriving. Carmen is in her third year at Northwestern and has been accepted into a prestigious engineering internship. Miguel earned a baseball scholarship to DePaul University and is studying sports medicine. Sophia is now 13 and dreams of becoming a veterinarian, a dream that no longer seems impossible. Maria finished her GED and is now working as a certified medical assistant at a community health clinic, helping other immigrant families navigate the healthcare system. She's dating a man named David, a coincidence that makes her smile, who is a social worker and shares her commitment to helping others. Carlos's furniture business has grown into a successful operation that employs 6 people and operates the nonprofit woodworking program I helped inspire. He's married now, to a woman who admires his craftsmanship and his character, and they're expecting their first child. As for my immediate family, they've built new lives based on effort rather than expectation. Sandra remarried last year to Robert, the high school teacher, and they've bought a small house that they can afford on their combined incomes. She's learned to find satisfaction in simple pleasures, gardening, cooking, reading books for enjoyment rather than professional development. Jake and Sarah got engaged and are planning a modest wedding that they're paying for themselves. Jake has been promoted twice at his marketing firm and is developing a reputation for creativity and hard work rather than just his educational pedigree. Emma finished her community college program and transferred to the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she's completing her film degree while working part-time at a production company. Her documentary about domestic workers has been selected for several film festivals, and she's developing a reputation as a filmmaker who tells authentic stories about working-class life. These aren't perfect people living perfect lives. Sandra still sometimes catches herself making calculations about money that Robert finds troubling. Jake occasionally resents the financial struggles that his friends with family money don't have to face. Emma sometimes wonders what her career might have looked like if she'd been able to stay at USC and make films with expensive equipment. But they've learned something valuable about the relationship between struggle and character, between earning and deserving, between family and mere biological connection. They've learned that love isn't something you're owed because of genetics. It's something you earn through care, respect, and genuine concern for each other's well-being. Most importantly, they've learned that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or their ability to provide financial security. It's measured by their capacity for kindness, their willingness to work for what they want, and their ability to see the humanity in people who serve them. I died believing that my family saw me as nothing more than a source of income, and that my death was valuable to them primarily as a financial event. But in forcing them to confront that ugliness in themselves, I gave them the opportunity to become better people. They took that opportunity, not immediately, not without struggle, and not without moments of resentment and resistance, but eventually they chose to become the kind of people who deserved the love I'd always wanted to give them. And that, in the end, was the most successful construction project of my career. I didn't build them a financial foundation, I built them a moral one. I didn't leave them money, I left them the chance to become worthy of love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their worst impulses. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the crisis that forces them to discover their own strength. I spent my last months learning that family isn't defined by blood or marriage contracts. It's defined by mutual care, respect, and sacrifice. Maria and her children were my family because they chose to care about my well-being without expecting anything in return. Sandra, Jake, and Emma became my family again only after they learned to do the same. The money was never the point. The money was just the tool I used to teach them what really mattered. In my workshop, I had a saying carved into a piece of oak that hung above my workbench. Measure twice, cut once.
It was a reminder that careful planning prevents costly mistakes. But I learned something in my final months that was even more important. Love wisely, give carefully. Not because love and generosity are dangerous, but because the people we love deserve to become the best versions of themselves, even if that requires us to withhold what they think they want in order to give them what they actually need. My family thought they needed my money. What they actually needed was the chance to discover their own worth, their own strength, their own capacity for love that wasn't conditional on financial benefit. I gave them that chance. They took it, and in the end, that made all the difference.